right, we are recording. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Lane. I'm the Indianapolis Special Collections Librarian, and we are here today for the 2021 Indianapolis Bicentennial Plan. This program is in partnership and was organized by the Marion County Historical Society. And I want to remind you guys that I sent you a survey in your email. So if you wouldn't mind filling that survey out at the end of today's program. And any questions you have, you can type them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of Jeff's program. So the 2021 Indianapolis Bicentennial Plan, the man with that plan is our Deputy Mayor for Community Development and for the City of Indianapolis, Jeff Bennett. Please take it away.
Thanks, Stephen. And thank you to the Marion County Historical Society, Bill Beck especially, for reaching out and giving me the opportunity to join you today. And thanks to the Indianapolis Marion County Public Library for co-hosting. The title slide that you see, might lead you to believe that this is a discussion solely about the city's bicentennial. It's going to turn out to be a lot more of a presentation about the city's centennial in 1920. Then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing over the next several months related to the city's bicentennial celebration. And that bicentennial began officially in June, and it takes place over the next 12 months to end at the end of next May. And that was done in a sort of calculated way to give us 12 months worth of Indianapolis events that were already occurring in normal times. But you might wonder why we began in June versus beginning in January. And that's really because we have two birthdays in Indianapolis. We have June 7th, 1820, which was the day that the state capitol commissioners voted to select the confluence of Fall Creek and White River to be the city's new state, or the state's new capital. And then we also have January 6th, 1821, which was the date that the state legislature ratified that vote, named the city Indianapolis, and then began the effort to plat the mile square and to relocate the state capital from Corydon to the new city, Indianapolis. And those two birth dates are reflected in celebrations that took place at other milestones over the city's history. The centennial celebration, the 100th birthday, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute, took place in June 1920, recognizing the June 7th, 1820 birth date. And the sesquicentennial, the 150-year anniversary, took place in 1971, celebrating that January of 1821 birth date. So let's dive into the centennial for a little bit. Took place over the course of was scheduled to take place over the course of 5 days around that June 7th birth date. It ended up being extended to a 6th day for reasons of the popularity of the centennial pageant that we'll talk about in just a minute. But it was scheduled to take place from June 5th to June 9th, 1920. To sort of set the stage on what Indianapolis looked like in 1920, this is a street map of Indianapolis that is circa 1920. The city comprised 42 square miles in 1920. I'm really interested in the population growth that we experienced in the city. So in 1860, for example, we were the 48th largest city in the country with a population just under 19,000. Between 1860 and 1900, the population grew by 8 times. So from 18,600 to almost 170,000 in population in 1900. And then it almost doubled again over the next 20 years. So that by 1920, we were the 21st largest city in the country with a population of 314,000 in this 42 square miles that you see outlined in red. I'll point you to the northwest boundary of Indianapolis, that long green stretch of land that is probably the furthest northwest that the city goes. That's Riverside Park, and it plays a key role in the centennial celebration of events, and we'll come back to that in just a few slides. The city's centennial headquarters in 1920 was located in the old library building. This was the building at the southwest corner of Meridian Street and Ohio Street, right in the heart of downtown. Not only did it house the library, the central library at one time, it also housed the headquarters of the Indianapolis Public Schools. But it served over the course of many months of planning and the 6 days of the centennial celebration as the headquarters for the centennial. I think it's important to think about what we were celebrating in 1920. This was billed as a celebration. We were celebrating progress and growth and economic advancement and industry and invention. These are two publications that came out, not the only two, but two publications that came out over the course of the centennial. The one on the left was a multi-page kind of guidebook to Indianapolis. It had the schedule of events over the 5 days. But it was really seemed to be meant for visitors to the city. It had the sort of statistical outlines that you would imagine, but then it had some highlights, and it was interesting what the Centennial Commission chose to highlight. Some of those highlights that were pointed out in the guidebook included that Indianapolis was the second city of the United States in the manufacture of automobiles and automobile accessories. That 8 million passengers came through the traction terminal in 1919, and that the track elevation in the vicinity of Union Station was ongoing at the time of the centennial. And then there were maps and other sort of points of interest. The centennial history of Indianapolis just so happened to be co-authored by Jacob Pyatt Dunn, who was the chair of the history committee of the Centennial Commission. It's almost like having James Madison write your history when you have Jacob Pyatt Dunn write your history in 1920. It's also interesting that we were sort of discussing or celebrating triumph. And that's really what stands out in the centennial history. So triumph in war, I would say in order, triumph in the Civil War, triumph in the American Revolution, and thirdly, triumph in the First World War, which had just ended and the soldiers had come home about 11 months prior to the centennial celebration. It was also the triumph of settlers. And when we say settlers, we're really talking about mainly white male settlers over the natural environment, over disease, over foreign cultures, and over the Native Americans who preceded them in the central part of the state of Indiana. Some broader themes emerged as well, the romanticism of white settlers and pioneer families. There was a log cabin at the corner of Pennsylvania and Market Street over the course of the centennial celebration. That was the ticket booth to get your tickets for the events. There was a replica of the McCormick's cabin that features in the pageant production, and it really meant something locally if you were a descendant of those pioneer families, and it was called out in newspapers and other publications, those decedent families. The other thing that was sort of a broader theme was assimilation of other cultures. Indianapolis proclaimed itself to be a melting pot. In the daily news accounts of the centennial events, we can clearly see racist depictions of the Native Americans who preceded the white settlers. They were considered to be noble savages. We see that in the street parade that takes place as part of the centennial. We see that again in the pageant, and we see that in the culminating event at Riverside Park, which was a water parade. And we see the discussion of the assimilation of immigrants and foreign cultures. That they were characterized as uncivilized, and they were ultimately saved through Americanization, through the melting pot concept, and a belief that because of progress and triumph, and in no small measure the Americanization of those immigrants, that Indianapolis and indeed the United States were on the verge of a new era of progress. I also found it interesting, and this is a little bit of an aside, one of the quotes in the Centennial Guidebook that sticks out to me, and I think probably still holds true to some extent today in Indianapolis. The guidebook said that Indianapolis people are nearly always courteous in answering the questions of strangers. So I find that just a common thread that I think we would still like to have hold true today. So I mentioned there were 5 full days of events, and this is the schedule. It grew to a 6th day, so it really went through Thursday, June the 10th. Alongside these 5 days of programs were displays of art and relics at the State House and the John Herron Art Institute, as well as activities in the parks, sporting events held across several days of the 5 days. The event kicked off on Saturday night. This was June the 5th, and it kicked off at Tomlinson Hall at 8 o'clock with an address by the mayor. The mayor at the time was Charles Jewett. This is Tomlinson Hall, and this is an inside view of what Tomlinson Hall might have looked like. This is not from the Centennial, but it's from an event that could have been staged in a similar way as an address from the mayor. If we're looking, standing behind the stage, looking out at the crowd, the only things that would really need to be added to the stage to make it make it Centennial specific was it was said that the stage had pictures of Lincoln, pictures of George Washington, and a picture of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument that joined the mayor and the group of speakers and hosts for that night's event. There was a sing-along that preceded the mayor's remarks. The songs you might guess, these were considered to be Hoosier melodies of the time, but they included My Country 'Tis of Thee, America the Beautiful, a song called Indianapolis, a song that they referred to as Indiana, but really we know it as Back Home Again in Indiana. A couple of Stephen Foster songs that no one would put in a sing-along today, Swanee River and Old Black Joe. And the ending of the sing-along, actually the sing-along ended after the mayor's remarks because the evening closed with the Star-Spangled Banner. So the mayor's remarks really talk about the sort of things that we were celebrating. We were celebrating progress. We were glorifying the first white settlers of the area, and attributing to them or owing to them so much of our progress because of their strength and intellect. We were standing upon the precipice of a new era because we had just triumphed in a world war, and we were going to emerge from the fallout of that cataclysm with a new view and a new approach to the future, and Indianapolis was going to play a central part in that new era. And then we were going to look forward, and there's a little bit of forward looking throughout the Centennial, and that things were only going to get better as we grew and as we improved, such that in 2020 we would have all of the advantages that our predecessors did not have. On Sunday, June the 6th, it was really a day of music and a day of religion. In the morning, the churches across the city were supposed to engage in messages that were related to the importance of religion in the city's formation and growth, its future importance, as a source of moral strength for the community. Interspersed between the morning church services and a sing-along that took place on the steps of the monument was the first of 2 concerts at the State Fairgrounds Coliseum. And so we move the focus or the location of centennial events to the fairgrounds. So here's the cover of the music program. So there were 2 music programs, one in the afternoon at about 3 o'clock and one at night at about 8 o'clock. Fairgrounds Coliseum at the time is not the Fairgrounds Coliseum that stands today. This one looks a little bit different. And if you want to get a sense of what the inside looked like, here it is set up for a banquet. But you see the sort of wide floor space and the seating around the perimeter. The 3 o'clock and the 8 o'clock musical programs at the Coliseum were supported by the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. It was a 70-piece orchestra that came over to accompany at 3 o'clock the Centennial Chorus, which was a 500-voice choir of local singers. And then at night, at 8 o'clock, accompanied the famous Indiana tenor Orville Harold, who was born in a small town south of Muncie, but he grew up to become a leading performer at the Metropolitan Opera and on Broadway. He came back home to perform for the Centennial. And, we sort of chuckle that it was the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra that came over because Indianapolis at the time did not have a symphony, but Indianapolis had 2 prior orchestras and appeared to just be in between the second Indianapolis Orchestra and the ISO that we know and love today, which came into being just about a decade after the Centennial celebration. In between the 3 o'clock and 8 o'clock musical performances was an interdenominational church service on the south steps of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, which also included a sing-along. And it was interesting to see the Church Federation leading that interdenominational service. I think that is maybe a common thread that we still hold today, is the cooperation across interfaith religious groups in our community. Monday, June 7th was the actual holiday. So from sunrise till sunset, there were events across the city. I've read that apparently every 30 minutes throughout the day, every half hour, all day long, there was the firing of a cannon at Arsenal Technical High School's campus. And I can't imagine what that must have been like by the end of the day if it truly did happen every 30 minutes. Schools had programs themselves in the morning. Many of them held their own commemorative pageants. They dismissed early. Businesses closed at 4 o'clock across the city to ensure that everyone could take part in the street parade, which took place at 8 o'clock that night. But before the street parade, there were other events throughout the day. There was ROTC drilling on the campus of Arsenal Technical High School. There were cornerstones laid both at Tech and Manual high schools for new buildings that were being constructed as part of the expansion of those schools' campuses. There were athletic events all day long, well, all afternoon, beginning at 2 and then all day long the Tuesday and Wednesday. There were golf and tennis and baseball tournaments. There were track and field events at the parks. Kind of a full slate of daytime events. Then at night, there was the parade, which was the first of kind of 3 just mammoth in scale public events. The parade began at 8 o'clock. It was a 4-mile parade route. And if you can visualize the streets of downtown, the parade started at Senate and Washington over by the State House, went east to Pennsylvania, went north on Pennsylvania to Mass Ave, and at the time, of course, Massachusetts Avenue came all the way down to that corner, jogged up Mass Ave to Delaware, Delaware to 16th, 16th to Meridian, and then back down Meridian all the way to Washington, and then east to New Jersey, where it broke up. It was about a 4-mile route that had 122 floats across 8 divisions of the parade. Each division of the parade had its own sort of director to marshal the floats. There were 14 bands. There were civic association, trade association, women's associations, churches, businesses, all had floats. Indianapolis Public Schools had 50 of those 122 floats. And to give you a sense of the attendance, I couldn't find any photos of this particular parade, and if somebody has them, I would love to see them. But the comparisons that were given in the newspaper were to the Welcome Home Day parade in 1919. So this was May 1919, celebrating the return of our fighting men from overseas, and the estimation of that day was 150,000 people lining the streets to welcome the troops home. This is maybe a little better view of what that could have looked like in terms of a crowd. IPD at the time estimated that maybe as many as 200,000 people watched the street parade. And that is, 2/3 of the city's population at the time, if it truly reached 200,000. It was a parade of firsts. The first electric car, the first modern electric car, gas-powered car, the first school, the first library, the first post office, the first Catholic church, the first bank. All of these firsts were celebrated along with the theme of the parade, which was the progress of the city. Progress in medicine, progress in education, progress in religion, progress in industry, progress in technology. To illustrate that progress, the floats were lit up, they were electrified, and over the course of the hour to 2 hours it took for those floats to traverse the 4 miles, the residents of the city really got a treat. One of the things that was interesting in reading the wrap-up of the parade was that the power of education to bring about the assimilation of nationalities was strongly emphasized. And while the parade only lasted an hour, every inch of it was packed with action, and bands were sprinkled through it the way raisins used to be sprinkled through a rice pudding before the raisin became a sort of semi-outlaw. And the next centennial in 2020, everybody will stand on the curb and snicker at the things that we think are so wonderful today. It was Monday that the Centennial Commission also announced that the pageant that was going to take place on Tuesday night would be repeated on Thursday night because it's sold out. So Tuesday is the pageant, and this is the sort of centerpiece event of the Centennial celebration. Although Monday was the actual holiday, this pageant has grown to be something that probably needs its own study and its own separate presentation. The pageant covered the history of Indianapolis over 8 episodes, from the birth of the town to the present era of growth and prosperity, as they said. And this is the cover of the pageant program. It also really served to be, in effect, the Centennial logo. And you can see the sort of demonstration of pioneer progress to modern era. It looks like the city's on fire, but really I think this pioneer is just felling a tree to build more stuff. But really, man, we joke that it looks like this is the smoke of progress, and the pageant was very much in celebration of that progress. The cast of the pageant may or may not have been 2,000 people, but that's what it certainly was portrayed as. And it was portrayed as 2,000 people wearing quaint costumes. And we have a few photos of those costumes, and you can get a sense of what we're talking about. This is the character Indianapolis. There was a character Indiana and a character Indianapolis that were elevated on pedestals on either side of the stage. They served as narrators throughout the performance, through all 8 episodes. Episode 4 featured characters of mud and malaria was depicted as a giant mosquito. I don't unfortunately have pictures of mud or malaria, but we do have pictures of some of the actors in episode 7, which was the Civil War era in Indianapolis. This particular photo, the person second from the left is possibly a McCormick descendant. It's marked at the bottom of the slide that this is Mrs. McCormick Miller, and her first name is either Fanny or perhaps Jenny McCormick Miller, and you can get a sense of some of the quaint costumes. Episode 8 was an interpretive dance that featured 200 ballet performers performing the Ballet of the Gifts, in which those dancers laid out various symbols of progress at the feet of the Indianapolis character, at the feet of that pedestal. At the end of episode 8, the entire cast began to sing the Centennial Hymn, which was also titled Indianapolis, was different from the sing-along Indianapolis song from a couple days before. This particular Centennial Hymn was set to the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and the performers and then the attendees marched out of the space singing this song. And I will not sing it for you today, but perhaps some other time you can coax me into singing the Indianapolis Centennial Hymn. Here's the thing about the pageant. It began at 8 o'clock at night. It lasted more than 4 hours. This newspaper account the next day said it was after midnight when the last episode was enacted. So that means to me it didn't end in 4 hours. It was still going strong at 4 hours. The reviews of the pageant are fun to read, and if you ever have a minute, you might, because the words unusual and weird were used multiple times in the reviews of the pageant. However, they were still largely positive. It said, from the viewpoint of staging, the pageant was a pleasing spectacle that needed only speeding up. And it was a commitment of the Centennial pageant directors that it would be repeated on Thursday night with the assurance that it would be over by 11 p.m. On Wednesday, this would be June the 9th. This was the scheduled last day of the Centennial. It was a culmination of the 5 days of events, and it was an event that was referred to as the Water Carnival or the Water Pageant at Riverside Park. So the throngs of similarly sized throng of onlookers who watched the parade on Monday night traversed over to the northwest side of the city to watch the Water Carnival, which took place from Riverside and between the Riverside Bridge and the Emmericksville Bridge. And so the Riverside Bridge is really what we consider to be the 30th Street Bridge. And you can see the steps down to the river on the left side of this photo. That's still there. What is not there is the Riverside Park Pavilion, which sat at the northwest corner of 30th Street and the river. So it went from the Riverside Bridge to the Emmericksville Bridge, and this was basically the 16th Street Bridge before the 16th Street Bridge that you see today replaced it. The Water Pageant Committee estimated that there were 122,000 people in attendance at the parade. This was a parade of boats. 78 boats, when all was said and done, portrayed a chronological progression of watercraft from canoes to flatboats to steamboats to hydroplanes. Many of these boats were also electrically lit. The Indianapolis Star said that there were craft representing everything from Pioneer's Barge to Geisha Girl's Grotto. So that must have been quite the sight. Ironically, or maybe it's totally appropriate, 3 boats that were participating in the parade got stuck on sandbars and couldn't actually participate in the parade. They were unable to move, like so many boats over so many years on the White River. There were 2 fireworks displays at the end of the night. There was one at Riverside, which I interpret to be near that park pavilion, although I guess there could have been a couple of other locations within the park that would have made sense. The other fireworks display was lit from the Indianapolis Athletic and Canoe Club, which is now Municipal Gardens Family Center. So those events on Wednesday night, the water carnival and the fireworks, marked the official end of the 5-day event. The pageant did take place again on Thursday night. There wasn't much of a write-up of the second performance of the parade to know whether they really did end it at 11 o'clock. I think we'll take them at their word, because a 5-hour pageant performed twice would have probably just been too much. On Friday, June the 11th, the Stars Society page reporter cast a look forward to 2020. And she had some interesting views of what the next century might look like. So this is a really long quote, and I'll give you a couple seconds to read it. But Prohibition had just taken effect, roughly 6 months before the centennial celebration. And what's funny about this is she is already thinking about Prohibition no longer existing, and she's already talking about how people were getting around Prohibition 6 months in to 6 months in to its existence. And then a couple of other quotes about the future, which are always a bit entertaining. So what are we doing for the Bicentennial? And if you would have asked me this 6 months ago, it would have been a much different presentation than it is today. What we want to do, and this is something that we continue to do in spite of not being able to gather together in person as we normally would in the city, is we want to look across some pillars for bicentennial events and opportunities to both reflect on our history and to celebrate it, but also think about what makes Indianapolis unique and what do we want our own Indianapolis of the future to look like in 50 years or at a tricentennial celebration 100 years from now. And it's important, I think, for us to realize that our history isn't always rosy. While the centennial celebration clearly had a celebratory air, we have the opportunity to take a look back and through a little bit of a critical lens as well as a celebratory lens, and realize that that we have some work to do if we want to become the Indianapolis that we strive to be. So what's happening now? I would first and foremost direct you to the Indy Turns 200 website, which has some history and some celebration and some events that are sort of past events that we've already had and events that are upcoming in which you can partake. We have a little bit of swag. I'm modeling the Indianapolis Centennial t-shirt myself today. We have an official spirit in partnership with West Fork Whiskey, and we'll have an official brew in partnership with Sun King, a beer that's coming up, as well as some shirts and stickers and other swag that we hope to roll out over the coming months. We had really been looking forward to a public kickoff event similar to both the Centennial and the Sesquicentennial, and we had one scheduled for the city's first birthday on June the 7th. It was going to take place in the Circle Theater with some remarks from the mayor in a similar vein to Mayor Jewett and to Mayor Lugar. When Mayor Lugar kicked off the Sesquicentennial, it was at the Murat. So we were going to have a similar kickoff that was indoors, and then we were going to move outdoors to Monument Circle for a more public birthday concert. We were going to sing "Happy Birthday," cake and ice cream, and do the birthday thing. And we've had to postpone that for obvious reasons. And we were able, in a relatively short turnaround time, to have at least a public kickoff on TV in partnership with Channel 8. That ended up being on June 28th, where we had a half-hour special that looked at the history and talked about the city's bicentennial. We do have signature partnerships that are underway. These are similar to the way the city celebrated the sesquicentennial. So that 12 months in 1971, there were partnerships with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There were partnerships with Indiana Black Expo, which held its first event in 1971. There were fireworks in 1971 off of the Indiana National Bank Tower. It was the first of its kind. So we have tried to capture some of those thoughts and past experiences in partnership with our local cultural institutions over the course of the 12 months of the bicentennial. And here are a few of those. The Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission has a poster that's available that's a really cool image of Union Station. Shout out to the Indiana Historical Society and Jordan Ryan's work to collect stories and documents and photos. And a lot of these come from city departments and public utilities and quasi-governmental agencies, and those photos and materials are searchable, and it's a really rich visual history of the Indianapolis. It has evolved to become the exhibit that you can visit at the Historical Society, as well as the You Are There interactive exhibit that is about the centennial. The Historical Society is also leading some of those critical looks at Indianapolis over the years, and the Living the Legacy series on city development and especially redlining is ongoing. And I believe there is an upcoming program that maybe next week, if not the week after, maybe the 27th of October is the next presentation in that series. The Polis Center was one of our first signature partnerships, and that's through the creation of the Digital Encyclopedia of Indianapolis. I know we all on this presentation have our own hard copies, and I personally cannot wait to have a digital, searchable, updatable version of the encyclopedia, which is forthcoming. Within the last month or so, we announced our signature partnership with the Arts Council, which involves the creation of more murals across the city. The first one being Major Taylor. It is planned to restore this mural, which is the Roland Hobart mural on Delaware Street, as part of that initiative. The WFYI Ted Green program is a little bit delayed due to COVID, but this will be a documentary on titled The Builders, which will be kind of a look at those civic leaders over the last 200 years that have made Indianapolis what it is today. The bicentennial tree planting that's hosted by Keep Indianapolis Beautiful is next Saturday, October 24th. And you can go to the KIB website to learn more and to participate if you're so inclined. The Crown Hill partnership is a walking tour that is downloadable from Crown Hill's website, and it's a tour of Indianapolis history through Crown Hill's wonderful sculptures and cemetery pieces. Historic Urban Neighborhoods of Indianapolis, if you go to HUNY Indy website, they have digital walking tours available through an app that you can download. Those are available right now and can get you out and about in a safe way, looking at some pretty cool historic architecture across the city. And then lastly, in partnership with Visit Indy, we have a downloadable bucket list of 200 Indianapolis experiences. And this is a sort of choose your own adventure of things that you can do across the city. This will live beyond the Bicentennial. And it's one of those things where anybody who has lived here their whole life or is new to the city can pick what they want to do and check them off over the course of a week or a month or a series of months. And it's a pretty interesting combination of sports and food and history and nature that is available through the Indy bucket list. And then beyond the signature partnerships are more community-based programs that we are endorsing. These are, well, I'll show you just a slide or so. So these might not rise to the level of a partnership with a civic institution, but these are things that give people at, no matter where they are and no matter how they want to engage, opportunities to do so. And so by coming through the endorsement process, we sort of allow use of the Bicentennial logo, and then we'll promote it on our calendar on the Indy Turns 200 website, and we'll recognize it through our social media channels. So this is just gives you some examples. So the Twin Air Block Party was literally a neighborhood-based gathering that was socially distant and outside. It took place a couple weeks ago. Indy Hub hosts an event each year, and it's usually at Central Library, where they connect young professionals with opportunities to join civic organizations and to participate on boards and in other ways. That's moving to a virtual format that will take place over a series of weeks and not just one or two evenings. The Heartland Film Festival has been ongoing, and I believe it ends today, and it's been totally online this year. On November the 9th, Indiana Landmarks is hosting a talk by Jim Glass on 200 years of Indianapolis architecture. And then Yelp holds an event, which is also usually at Central Library. And that is in development now as a way to support local businesses at the holiday times. So just a few examples of the many community endorsed projects that we've had over the months and that we will continue to do. And I would just wrap up by saying, we fully intend to reschedule the June 7th event at the earliest possible opportunity when it's safe for all of us to gather. We had intended to do a second public event sometime in early January around the second city birthday of January the 6th. But that is probably unlikely to happen. So stay tuned for commission-hosted events that could be forthcoming when the coast is clear for us to get together again. So tried to leave some time for questions and discussion. Stephen, should I turn it back over to you for going through questions that may have popped up over the last few minutes?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the presentation of going over the Centennial and the hard work you and your team has done to pivot during the pandemic to, keep the celebration going, and also, being really creative about how you go about it. So really well done. Yeah, I think we're like a small little crew. So yeah, if people just want to unmute and ask questions, if you have.
Yeah, jump in. I did mention to Stephen that there is a pretty significant amount of material available on the Centennial because it was such a compact series of events over several days. It was on the front page of newspapers pretty much every day, at least Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and I think even Wednesday. By Thursday, it had fallen off, but I'd be glad to share some of the links that have been shared with me If there are researchers who are interested in digging into the pageant or digging into the work of the commission itself, there's some pretty interesting stuff there. And for those of you that may have joined James Madison's talk about his book on the Klan and the Heartland just the other night, it had me thinking about, you know, where we were as a city in 1920, and, you know, by the end of 1922 into 1923, how things seem to really have changed, or and changed for the worse in terms of our treatment of our fellow residents.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Yep, I can, loud and clear.
Yeah. Talk a minute about the commission and how far, when did they start planning the 2020, the 1920 centennial?
So I'd have to go back to the minutes to see how far out, but it was at least, seemingly at least months in advance. I don't know if it was a year. So our Bicentennial Commission began meeting at the end of 2018 to begin thinking about ours. Theirs seemed to be months, but I'd have to look back at the minutes again to try to, they're not necessarily in chronological order, the notes from the Centennial Commission.
What was the Centennial Commission, how was that established? I mean, was that formed by the city of Indianapolis? Did it have input from chamber, from various and sundry?
So it appeared to be civically formed and led. And the only reason I say that is because the commission invited the mayor to speak at that opening event on Saturday night, the 5th. And it wasn't a foregone conclusion that he was going to accept. And you can sort of read in their correspondence back and forth that he did accept, obviously, but it wasn't like something that was scheduled around the mayor. And the commission itself was a sort of core group of people, but then there were committees and committees and committees and committees for just about everything that took place. There was a pageant committee, there was a parade committee, there was a history committee. There were, maybe a dozen or more committees that then grew to their own large sizes in the planning stages for the various events. So in a way, it reflects the way Indianapolis does things today. When we talk about planning for a NCAA Final Four, I'm on the local organizing committee, and there are subcommittees and subcommittees and subcommittees of that local organizing committee. And it's just this interesting piece of maybe civic DNA that we have where people get involved in things. So the minutes and the correspondence of that commission are pretty rich with information.
Okay.
I'm curious a little bit about the sesquicentennial, I cannot say that word, 150th anniversary, and just how that celebration, you know, because it happened like right after UNIGOV went into effect in 1970. So were they talking about how to kind of unify these new townships during those celebrations? Was Richard Lugar talking about that at all?
So it's interesting. We don't know exactly why our civic leaders decided that 1971 was going to be the sesquicentennial. And so part of our theory, which has sort of, we haven't proven, is that maybe they chose 1971 because of Unigov in 1970, and they were like so busy implementing that government reorganization that there just wasn't time, and so they defaulted to 1971. And it really was, it appeared to be 12 months where there were events on a monthly basis. So the Centennial was event every day, a major event every day. And in 1971, you could almost go in January through December and have a large civic event each month. But I don't know, we haven't found Mayor Lugar's remarks to know whether it was a discussion of sort of government consolidation, government progress, we're all in this together, or if it was the more celebratory look back and then the launch of some events that were clearly going to exist beyond the sesquicentennial. So there's more turf to be mined in the sesquicentennial research for sure.
Awesome.
What really stuck out to me about the sesquicentennial was the awesome kind of public art components that are so transcendent and unique.
Were there anything that lasting pieces of the centennial? Was it all ephemeral? Is there any, I'm trying to think of any lasting monument to the centennial that's around.
So the buildings, the cornerstones that were laid at Tech and Manual. So I was under the impression that it was only a cornerstone at Tech, and that is Treadwell Hall. That building is still standing. I only found out about the Manual cornerstone yesterday when I was kind of going through my slides one more time and was reading a couple of newspaper reports that I hadn't seen before. So I want to dig into what building that was on the Manual campus, because I assume and presume it's still standing too. So those two things stick out to me as lasting that were directly related to the centennial. There could be more.
And of course, it was just about that time that we got the Indiana War Memorial and American Legion. So I was wondering if maybe that somehow was tied. Have you seen any ties to that in
not specifically. Now, there were certainly floats in the parade that were American Legion sponsored, but I don't know that it would have directly correlated with the building.
I mean, the buildings they hadn't even like demolished buildings for it, but anyway, and I'm just very disappointed that you didn't find more photos.
I know.
Oh, that's so disappointing.
The only photos that well, there was a photo of it was sort of more of an etching of the replica of McCormick's cabin that appeared in the pageant, but it didn't reproduce very well to show in slides. It's in the newspaper. And then the photos that I showed, there were a couple more photos of costumes from the pageant, but they were the same characters, just individual photos of them. So yeah, there's probably more out there somewhere, and maybe somebody else on this presentation would know, but man, it would be great to see photos of the parade. There are photos of the state bicentennial parade. But not, and I was hoping that maybe one was mislabeled and it was really the city's centennial, but not so far.
And no full scripts of the pageant you haven't uncovered.
Well, so the pageant program is 65 pages long, and it does have dialogue in it. Okay. And it appears to be the whole script.
Okay, cool. All right. I was curious to see some of the weirdness and sort of.
It is, yeah, it's well worth reading and sort of imagining what it must look like in that cavernous space where the whole floor was taken up by the production.
Okay, good to know. I'll probably check that out because you piqued my interest.
So we're also in the centennial for, women's rights to vote and things like that. Was that incorporated in the centennial pageant in any way?
So I re-looked at both the parade and the pageant, and it didn't, because the last act of the pageant was the interpretive dance of 200 ballerinas. It really didn't get to the present in the suffragist movement. The last act of the pageant where there was acting and real dialogue was episode 7, which was really the Civil War and immediate post-Civil War growth years. And I couldn't find in the list of parade floats that there was a women's suffrage specific float. I could have missed it, but I just didn't see it. So it was interesting to not, maybe it was just so fresh that it wasn't incorporated.
Or it may have appeared in the women's club's stuff, but not in less obvious, less overt. In programming than.
Sometimes the titles of the floats just weren't very descriptive on what was actually depicted in that.
Right. So that may be true too. So again, wish we had photos.
Right.
I know. Oh man. I mean, just see.
It's too bad.
To see electrified floats from 1920, I mean, would have just been pretty cool.
That's really wild that they're non-extant. So oh well.
I feel like they're out there somewhere.
They have to be somewhere.
Yeah.
Where?
I mean, the history that was published is a wealth of photos, and if for those of you that are interested in built environment and historic preservation, it is a unfortunate photographic essay of all the buildings that we've lost over the years, and it's a place where these buildings are all together in photographic evidence, unlike many other sources that I've seen.
Well, that's good to know too, because we plan on doing a feature on Lost Indianapolis. So that's a good tip to where to find a good catalog of all.
The other thing that was really interesting was in the Centennial Guidebook. So I'm a nerd about Old City Hall, and in the Centennial Guidebook is a floor-by-floor listing of every office that was in Old City Hall. It was only 10 years old at the time, and so it really filled in some of the blanks that I had about who was located where and what offices were located in City Hall at the time.
We may also be talking to you, Jeff, about extending some encyclopedia entries for centennial anniversaries and the like, and working with you and Jordan and everybody. And get everything up with you, Jordan and Jeff Mills, to get some of this stuff into the encyclopedia so it doesn't disappear.
Yeah, it would be fun. It'd be fun to have a one-stop shop for that stuff.
Yeah. So I'm hoping to talk to Jeff and Jody and those guys, and some of the information you presented here to be an extended. And of course, Bill's already involved in that with stuff on the pandemic. So yeah, it's going to be lots of fun, I think, working with everybody, to just hopefully keep this excitement going.
And on that note, I just want to be mindful of time. We are at 3 o'clock, and I just want to thank you so much, Jeff Bennett, for your research and for the work you're doing to celebrate our city's history. And thank you everyone for attending today's session, and it will be available on YouTube. So thank you, everyone.
Right. Thanks, Jeff. Bye.
Yeah, it was great.
I know.
Thanks. See ya.